Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the most toxic of them all?
Ooh, what if you just tried playing a real deck?
I think with every card game, the most frustrating playstyle to play against is that stack/floodgate style of play. The strategy often gets called evil and unskilled, and God forbid one of them actually becomes good. And look, I'm not actually here to defend this style of play or try to convince you that it's ethical to play Floodgates. But instead, I want to compare Magic Floodgates to Yu-Gi-Oh! Floodgates and see which ones are more egregious. And instead of just trying to analyze each Floodgate like a crazy person, instead I kind of turn this into a game. I've broken Floodgates down into essentially 7 categories. And we're going to pick a representative from each game in those subcategories and pit them against each other. The game that has the more egregious card, in my opinion, is going to get a toxic point. And at the end, the most toxic game wins. And obviously, this is just for fun and purely opinionated, so feel free to join in and keep track of your own points and see how it differs from mine. But before we begin, let's lay out some ground rules. The first ground rule is that I'm just going to be ignoring the ban list. If any poor soul had to sit against this card at any point in the game's life cycle, I think it counts. And second, I'm including lingering floodgates like Max C. This point will actually matter for both games, so I think it will end up being fair. As for how I got these cards, I want to thank r/MasterDuel for essentially being tricked into a survey. I mean, you just have to ask them what their least favorite floodgate is, and they'll just trauma dump you. And you guys really had a lot to get off your chest. And then using my decade of Magic experience, I'm going to pick a card that I think is the closest contender to fight against the Yu-Gi-Oh card in each subcategory. So if you disagree with any of the Magic representatives, let me know. And if you disagree with any of the Yu-Gi-Oh representatives, be mad at Reddit. But with all that out of the way, let's get to our first category. So these are cards that don't really stop you from playing the game, but they put you at a huge disadvantage if you do decide to play into them. And for Yu-Gi-Oh, I think the obvious choices are the Mulcharmies, with the biggest offender being Max C. And Max C really needs no introduction for Yu-Gi-Oh or even Magic players at this point. It's a card that basically puts the opponent in a damned if you do or damned if you don't situation. And when most Magic players get shown Max C, they usually compare it to a Ristic Study or Smothering Tithe, which is a pretty decent comparison. I'm personally going to put Hole Breacher in here, because the thing with Magic, it's not uncommon to draw multiple cards in a single turn. And since Hole Breacher has Flash, you can use it in response to one of those spells to get some immediate value. And with the extra mana that the card generates from the treasure, you end up getting very far ahead of the opponent, usually to the point to where you just win the game on the spot. This is especially true with cards like Wheel of Fortune, where you can just force your opponent to discard their entire hand, you draw 7, and gain 7 mana. And in a Commander game, you're gaining 21 mana instead, which is also game-ending. But even not thinking about that wheel combo, the card is still good on its own. Locking out draw spells and being able to generate extra mana like that is usually enough to close out the game. But even with all that, I'm still giving the first point to Yu-Gi-Oh! Because the truth of the matter is that drawing a card in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not the same as drawing a card in Magic. Like, to give Maxi a proper equivalent in Magic, you'd have to take Ristic Study, Smothering Tithe, mush them together, and give it Flash. Which I don't even think Wizards is crazy enough to print, so the point goes to Yu-Gi-Oh! So when it comes to not searching for cards, a lot of people brought up stuff like Thunder King Ryo and Thunder Dragon Colossus, but definitely the biggest pain point people have when it comes to this category is Droll and Lockbird for Yu-Gi-Oh! If an opponent adds a card to their hand outside of the draw phase, Droll and Lockbird then prevents the player from continuing to do that for the rest of the turn. And in a combo-centric game like Yu-Gi-Oh!, that can usually be turn-ending. And for the decks that can play around Droll and Lockbird, they usually use Droll defensively to nullify things like Max C and Mulcharmy Foolos. Which, the idea of fighting Toxic with Toxic is probably a discussion all on its own for another day. But do you want to know the fucked up part? I don't think Droll and Lockbird is that toxic. I don't even think it's that bad. And even after making this video, I still don't think it's that bad. And that 100% has to do with our Magic representative. Now, don't get me wrong, Magic hasn't shied away from this kind of effect. They've had cards like Stranglehold, Ashiok, and even Mind Sensor. And they're good cards, but they never felt like they pushed the boundary. That is until one day Wizards decided to push the boundary way over the bar, and they printed Opposition Agent. Go ahead, read this card. I'll wait. Similar to Hole Breacher, this guy has Flash, so you can get that immediate value off of it by using it in response to a search. But this effect is so much worse. Like, imagine you're just sitting there at a table, you play Reinforcements of the Army, and your opponent responds with Opposition Agent. They then pick up your deck, remove the best target from your deck, and then can treat it as if it's in their hand. Or they can just leave it exiled, whatever they want to do. And if you want to search again, you have to get rid of Opposition Agent because it's a floodgate and it's going to control your whole search. And this card is especially devastating against things like the fetch lands, which, to give you guys an idea, the fetch lands are as ubiquitous as hand traps. If you want to play even a semi-competitive deck, you're going to be using fetch lands. So you can imagine how annoying it is if you're going second, play a fetch land, and your opponent responds with something like Dark Ritual Opposition Agent. You now give your opponent that land, and you basically got cycled for one land. Like 1,000,000% Magic wins this category. Opposition Agent is fucking stupid. Alright, no graveyards. I don't have to explain that to you guys, right? You all pretty much know what that entails. But what I will say is that the graveyard is actually very important to both Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic. And for Yu-Gi-Oh! There's the classics like Dimensional Fissure and Macrocosmos. Kashtira Riseheart also made it on the list, so shout out to those who hate it that much. But by far the biggest contender in this category is Dimensional Shifter. And for the same reason as Droll and Lockbird, it's number 1 because it can be used on turn 0. Now this comparison was actually my inspiration for this video because Magic has a pretty much one-to-one comparison to it, which is Leyline of the Void. To me, the only difference between these two is really just the fact that Leyline of the Void starts the game in play. There's no responding to it, it's just already in play by the time the first phase happens. So now this really comes down to just how bad is it to not have access to your graveyard in either game. And I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Is going to get the point here, but not for the reasons you might think. You see, in Yu-Gi-Oh!, if you need to send something to the graveyard for cost, you can't even attempt to activate it if you're under an effect like Dimensional Shifter. This pseudo locks out a lot of other cards that would otherwise be fine to play. And I think that little bit extra feels bad, adds the extra layer on top for Yu-Gi-Oh! To give them that extra point. So for this one, we're going to specifically focus on monster/creature negation. And Yu-Gi-Oh! Has plenty of these. Skill Drain, Soul Drain, Harpy's Featherstorm, the Monarch's Erupt. You could probably find about 1,000,000 different versions of this effect as a continuous trap card. But there's 2 of them that actually stood up above the rest because they sit in the extra deck. And that's Nightmare Griffin and Bagooska. And Bagooska's actually going to win the seat here because not only is it a floodgate, but on your turn, you can turn it to attack position to turn off its floodgate effect so you can just play the game and roll your opponent. Now Magic also likes to print this effect as well, except it's not always so symmetrical. Like the old Linvala was already good, and then they just put out a strict upgrade to it. And I also considered cards like Torpor Orb for this category, but really there was just one card that I felt like fit the bill the most. And that card is Humility. Now, Humility is basically Skill Drain on crack because it takes away the advantage of having just the bigger meatball as well. And with Bagooska, a big factor is that you can get it from the extra deck, so it's consistently always there. And let's just say Magic has put out some cards that enable combos that let you put any enchantment from your deck into play on turn 1. So it's not really hard to get to Humility either. And I honestly think Magic gets the point for this one because Humility is just a crazy card. So for this one again, we're going to focus entirely on creatures and monsters. And the reason I feel like this needed its own category is because this is Yu-Gi-Oh's favorite mechanic to put out as far as floodgates are concerned. There's old legacy cards like Royal Oppression and Vanity's Emptiness that send shivers down veteran players' spines. There's probably a post on r/Master Duel at least once a day of someone complaining about a barrier statue or a fossil dyna. Even cards like Dimensional Barrier people want banned. So when I was originally making this list, I didn't think there was going to be a clear-cut winner because, you know, they all seem pretty the same. But, no, there was a clear-cut winner by, like, a landslide. Number 86 Heroic Champion, Rongo Minad. Rongo Minad? Rongo. I'm just calling him Rongo. And I'll be honest, I've never read Rongo until I made that Reddit post. And my god, my jaw dropped when I read that card. I don't think there's a single deck that could out a 4 or 5 material Rongo. I mean, you can't even kaiju it because of the summon lock. And when I tried to look for a Magic equivalent, I gotta be honest, there kind of really isn't any. Like, yeah, maybe you can be playing like a Hug Stax deck and give the opponent a Steel Golem. Maybe Deafening Silence or something like Portcullis. And to be honest, I even included cards in this list that restrict gameplay for the turn. Stuff like Rule of Law, which I'm actually going to pick for Magic's choice here. But, like, come on, man. Just look at Rongo. There's nothing Magic has that's going to beat that in terms of this kind of floodgate. 100% point goes to Rongo. So for the Yu-Gi-Oh people wondering where I'm putting Royal Decree and Imperial Order cards like that, it's actually going to go into this category here. But as obnoxious as cards like those were, I think the winner here is actually Shockmaster. Shockmaster not only being another generic level 4 Floodgate from the extra deck, Shockmaster has the flexibility to choose between Spell, Trap, and Monster. And really the only way to beat Shockmaster is to draw the out. But at the same time, at least you kind of can draw the out. You see, Magic has cards like Iona, Shield of Emeria. And this card will completely lock a monocolored player just out of the game from playing any spell in their deck. And then there's cards like Blood Moon, which I think is going to be Magic's representative here. And there's a lot of cards that are very similar to Blood Moon, but essentially the way it reads is that if you're not playing red in your deck, you can no longer play your deck. You could draw a million cards and still not have a single spell to cast. And because you can't even draw the out against these kind of cards, I'm going to give the point to Magic. And for this final round, we're going to compare the best of the best. And this is the most upvoted Floodgate that was in my Reddit question, which I think without any surprise is Mystic Mine. Now, I was fortunate enough to not have the displeasure of having to ever play against Mystic Mine, but you guys shared your stories. You also shared that feature match that's like 30 pages of draw a card and pass, which was kind of funny. And it definitely doesn't help with how searchable field spells are, just generically. Like, something tells me that Mystic Mine was part of the reason why Terraforming took one for the team. And for the Magic one, I actually went to a few Magic communities that I'm still a part of, and I just asked them what they think would be the best Floodgate or Lingering Floodgate compared to a Yu-Gi-Oh card. And their top answer was straightforward, but powerful. It's Orm's Chant. Just 1 mana instant, you can't cast spells this turn. And for an extra 1 mana, you can turn off battling too. And this card is the reason why I think the Lingering Floodgate effect rule is fair. And for a little extra context, it is not hard for a blue-white deck to loop Orm's Chant over and over and over again. In fact, you can try to be avoiding the combo and still trip and fall into a different way to combo it. But the biggest problem with Orm's Chant that I think Mystic Mine doesn't have is that Orm's Chant has an opportunity for the opponent to play instant spell or flash speed creatures in response to your Orm's Chant each turn. It's not a guaranteed lock 'em out. And I think that really does reduce the power of Orm's Chant. So I'm going to give this final point to Yu-Gi-Oh! Because Mystic Mine is a pretty fucked card. So winning by a score of 4-3, we have Yu-Gi-Oh! And Konami, if you're watching this, your trophy's in the mail. It's made from the tears of everyone who had to play against Mystic Mine. But if you guys decided to play along, what does your point spread look like and how did it differ from mine? And would you change any of the cards that got represented into each subcategory? Let me know. And until next time, I hope you guys have a beautiful day. Love you guys. Bye. Also, some of you may have noticed I got a new mic. And the rest of you might be wondering, George, what the hell are you doing? You're not supposed to use this mic like this. And you know what? I agree. I fucked up and I didn't know that the wire was just going to be in the arm without being able to be removed. And at this point, I just think it's funnier to hold a big arm mic like this. But yeah, anyway, have a wonderful day, guys. Thank you so much for the support.